A Trump-era policy that shut out top Chinese students could be hurting America more than Beijing, who is one of more than 1,000 Chinese students who spent years working toward studying at a U.S. university, only to have their studies stalled, first by COVID and then by an ambiguously worded visa ban imposed under the Trump administration. Faced with the perceived threat of Chinese students conducting espionage on U.S. soil amid heightened tensions with China, then U.S. President Donald Trump introduced the ban that effectively prevents graduate science, technology, engineering, and mathematics students from several Chinese universities from gaining visas to the U.S., the world's biggest research hub. The ban is based on a simple presumption: if you have been to a certain school, you will be targeted and labeled as a spy, Hu said. I think it's a policy of discrimination based on nationality. The combination of the and the pandemic have led to a complete derailing of studies, their careers, and their lives. Experts say the issue goes far beyond the individual students who are directly impacted, warning that shutting out international graduate students who contribute to important STEM studies could have implications for the quality of American research. It could also impact the ability of U.S. institutions to recruit Chinese students and exacerbate the already fraught relations between the two countries. COVID and a visa ban. For the first few months of last year, a U.S. travel ban to stop the rapid spread of COVID prevented Hu from returning to the U.S. from his hometown in China. Then, last May, Hu's problem turned political. For years, U.S. intelligence has warned that China is using student spies to steal American secrets. The Australian Strategic Policy Institute, an independent think tank, says recruiting students is part of China's military-civil fusion strategy of using civilians to boost its military power, something that has been increasing in the past decade. It is legitimate to be concerned about vulnerabilities within universities, said Robert Daly, the director of the Wilson Center's Kissinger Institute on China and the United States and a former U.S. diplomat in Beijing.
But, he adds, it has to be measured against the enormous benefit we've had from the brain drain contribution of Chinese students and scholars over the past 40 years in the United States. Beijing has called claims of student espionage groundless, arguing that unsubstantiated accusations are a type of bigotry and discrimination that will ultimately damage U.S. interests. Undeterred, Trump signed a presidential proclamation in May last year clamping down on visas for students with perceived military ties. With the virus raging and travel bans in place, Hu opted to delay his studies by a year. Hu, like other students, hoped Trump's challenger Joe Biden would be elected and rescind the proclamation, widely known as the PP 10043. That leaves Hu in limbo. If he applies for a new U.S. visa, he fears he'll be asked about his university record and then rejected under PP 10043. Students caught out. It took Kerry Fong years of study before he was accepted to a PhD program at the University of California, Davis, on a full scholarship, and only 10 minutes for his dream to end at the U.S. Consulate General in Shanghai last month. Initially, Fong tried to play down that he had studied at a college linked to China's military. After all, it was 7 years ago, and he had letters of support from his U.S. university. But as the staffer at the U.S. Consulate pressed him for answers, the 30-year-old admitted he'd studied at Harbin Engineering University, another leading university affiliated with China's MIIT. The staffer talked with her supervisor, then began typing. A few minutes later, he said she handed him a refusal form and told him, because of the presidential ban, you cannot get a visa now. I graduated from university 7 years ago, and the ban still won't let me go, Fong said. If the U.S. wants to target China, it should not target a specific group of people, and it should give the power to the visa officer, so that the officer can make his own judgment, rather than doing it in this broad brushstroke manner. Wang was only asked 2 questions at the consulate in Guangzhou: where had he gone to undergraduate school, and what was his major.
Are the students spies? Some were refused a visa, while others had their visas revoked and were expelled from the U.S. Many others may have decided not to apply for a visa due to the ban. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has urged the U.S. to withdraw its visa restrictions. Last month, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian expressed great concern that some Chinese visa applications had been denied. They are of great significance to enhancing mutual understanding between the two peoples and promoting the steady development of China-U.S. ties, Zhao said. adding the U.S. visa restrictions carry on a poisonous legacy of the Trump administration and run counter to the U.S. statement of welcoming Chinese students. Chinese officials raised the U.S. visa issue at recent high-level talks with U.S. counterparts in Tianjin, according to Chinese state media. China's denials are in part undermined by several cases of espionage prosecuted in the U.S. In recent years, for instance, student Zhe Songjin was charged with attempting to smuggle biological research to China, and Chinese electrical engineering student Ji Chaokan was indicted by a grand jury, accused of acting as an illegal agent. Institutions with strong military and security links are disproportionately implicated in theft and espionage, according to a 2019 Australian Strategic Policy Institute report. Really using a giant machete where they could be using a scalpel, Fish said. While Fish doesn't think Biden would have initiated the policy, the tense U.S.-China relationship means it might not be a politically savvy time to reverse it. If Biden were to rescind this, he would leave himself wide open to attacks from Republicans about being too soft on China, about throwing the door open to Chinese espionage, even though that's not really what the situation is, Fish said. To Hu's friend Matthew Jagielski, a PhD graduate from Northeastern University, the thought of Hu being a spy is laughable. I definitely don't get the impression that his research is a military-sensitive thing.
I also don't get the impression that he is a person trying to sneak in or anything, he said. He was very much a staple of the lab. It's just really unfortunate. The cost of shutting out students. It's not just Chinese students missing out. The Trump-era policy could impact the quality of U.S. research as well, experts say. Although the students affected make up only a tiny proportion of Chinese students overall, they're doing some of the most critical research. An estimated 16% of STEM graduate students in the U.S. are Chinese nationals. About a third of top-tier AI researchers did their undergraduate degrees in China, but more than half of them went on to study, work, and live in the U.S., according to Macro Polo, a Chicago-based think tank. What you're doing is you're keeping out thousands of very high-value Chinese students in very valuable fields that contribute a lot to American research, that contribute a lot to these labs, Fish said. Whose friend Jagielski puts it simply, if you have fewer grad students, it means that less research is being done. That worries U.S. universities. Though Northeastern, whose university, said it couldn't comment on specific students, the university chancellor sent a letter to Chinese international students last year, saying it would challenge short-sighted policies. In May, the vice provost for international affairs at prestigious Cornell University, Wendy Wolford, wrote to the U.S. Secretary of State, criticizing the highly charged and ambiguous atmosphere for students. Maintaining the flow of international students to the United States is necessary to both retaining our global preeminence and building stronger cultural and political bridges to the rest of the world, Wolford wrote. Hung, for instance, was set to research the International Thermonuclear Fusion Reactor, with the aim of developing clean energy for the future use of all mankind, he said. Hu, ironically, was researching algorithm auditing in a bid to make Google search results more equal. No matter what ethnicity you are, regardless of men and women, you get this kind of fair and friendly results, he said.
Even if I am studying at a U.S. university, people all over the world can read my paper. So, from this point of view, even though I am in the U.S., in some sense I am also contributing to China and the world. In recent years, China's universities have been amping up their research capabilities in an attempt to lure top researchers. But while China's research output is improving, the U.S. remains the world's research powerhouse, meaning it's able to attract top global talent. One of the greatest sources of American power is that we still have the best universities in the world that attracts the top talent, Daly said. And the excellence of our universities depends on openness and internationalization. China's attractiveness to talents is now gradually catching up with the United States, because China is a country that is becoming more and more attractive to talent in terms of economic strength, Fang said. If the United States does not maintain the academic superiority, this part of the international talent will be lost, and the lost talent may go to China. What will happen next? Some politicians in the U.S., however, are pushing for even tougher rules. Republican Senator Tom Cotton has introduced a bill restricting all undergraduate and postgraduate Chinese STEM students, claiming it would secure American research from Chinese Communist Party espionage and influence. The congressman's rhetoric is reinforcing the hatred of Asians and Chinese, who said, "I just can't afford wasting a year or two on this just because of the US visa restriction," he said, adding that he resigned from his job in Nanjing because he thought he would be able to go to the US. "If the time is wasted, it's a waste of youth." Some say fewer Chinese students arriving in the US will reduce cross-cultural understanding at a time when it is needed most. The move could also alienate prospective students disturbed by the discrimination Chinese students face in the US and the suspicion clouding the US-China relationship. "I really think when you weigh the minuscule amount of espionage that this might be preventing against the massive competitive disadvantage the US is putting itself at with this, really it's a very counterproductive move," Fish said.
That's the feeling for Hu is still stuck waiting for something to change. Correction, an earlier version of this story misstated where the consulate Wan applied for his visa was located. It was in Guangzhou.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.